Can we buy that boy, Daddy? The mountain trading ground buzzed with voices' boots scraping over frozen earth, the smell of smoked meat and pine thick in the cold air, when 7-year-old Eliza Hartley pulled at her father's coat sleeve and pointed toward the far edge of the clearing. Her voice barely rose above the wind. Daddy, can we buy that boy? Jonah Hartley stopped, walking, his breath caught in his chest, and for a moment the noise of the market faded away like the world had gone quiet just for him. At the edge of the crowd beside a broken wagon sat a child no more than 8 years old. His feet were bare against the snow, his clothes torn thin and hanging from his frame. Like rags, his arms were wrapped around his knees, but it did nothing to stop the shaking. His face was pale, lips, blue eyes hollow. Jonah knew that look. It was the look of someone who had learned not to hope. Stay close, Eliza, he said, though his voice had gone rough. They walked toward the wagon. Slowly, people passed by. Some glanced at the boy. Others looked away. No one stopped. No one asked questions. Jonah knelt down carefully, the way you did when approaching something wounded. Hey, son, he said softly. The boy did not move. Eliza knelt beside her father, ignoring the cold soaking through her dress. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of bread wrapped in cloth. She held out with both hands. Are you hungry? The boy's eyes flicked to the bread. His fingers twitched, but he did not reach. Go on, Jonah said gently. You can take it. Slowly, the boy reached forward, grabbed the bread, and shoved it into his mouth, chewing fast like someone afraid it would be taken away. When did you last eat? Jonah asked. The boy swallowed and shook his head. Eliza looked up at her father, her eyes shining with tears. Daddy, please. Jonah closed his eyes briefly. 7 years since he buried his wife. Rose 7 years of living alone in the mountains, raising Eliza with callous hands and a guard of heart. He had come down for supplies and a single promise to his daughter, not for this. But some things found you whether you were ready or not. What is your name? Jonah asked. A long pause. Evan, the boy whispered. Jonah nodded him. Jonah, this is Eliza. The boy flinched as a shout rose nearby. His shoulders curled inward like he expected pain. Did someone hurt you? Jonah asked. The boy did not answer, but the trembling worsened. Jonah stood and scanned the market. No one was watching. No one cared. Child could freeze to death here, and by morning he would just be another rumor. We can't leave him, Eliza said quietly. There was no begging in her voice, only certainty. Jonah looked at her and saw Rose staring back at him, the same stubborn kindness, the same fire. All right, he said. They brought Evan to the food stall. Jonah paid for stew and bread and milk. Evan ate, slowly this time, like he was learning how to trust the food would stay. Where are you from? Jonah asked. Different places. Anyone looking for you? Evan's hands clenched and his breathing quickened. Easy, Jonah said. You're safe right now. After the meal, Jonah wrapped Evan in his coat. The boy leaned into the warmth without realizing it. We're going home, Jonah said. Eliza smiled brighter than the sun breaking through winter clouds. As they left the market, snow began to fall. The mountains watched silently as 3 lives shifted onto a path none of them could have imagined. And Jonah Hartley, who had sworn never to open his heart again, felt the first crack form in the walls he had built around it. The ride back to Mountain Cabin was long and slow. The snow thickened as the trail climbed higher, and the wind cut through the trees like a warning. Jonah kept Evan wrapped tight in his coat, seated in front of him on the saddle, while Eliza followed close behind on her pony. Evan did not speak. His small hands clutched the wool, like it might vanish if he loosened his grip. Jonah could feel the boy shaking, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, something learned. You're doing fine, Jonah said, quietly, just a little farther. The cabin appeared through the snowfall, tucked against rock and pine. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney. The fire had died while they were gone, but it was shelter, and that mattered. Jonah dismounted first, lifting Evan down carefully. The boy nearly collapsed when his feet touched the ground. Jonah caught him easily. I've got you, he said. Inside the cabin, Eliza rushed to light the lamps. The small space filled with warm yellow glow. Jonah built the fire fast, muscle memory taking over. He filled the kettle, hung it over the flames, and pulled down blankets from a shelf. Sit here, he told Evan, guiding him to the chair closest to the hearth. Eliza returned with dry socks and one of Jonah's old shirts, too big, but clean. She knelt in front of Evan. We can make you warm, she said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Evan stared at her eyes, wide like he was trying to understand kindness. Jonah helped him change. He tried not to react to what he saw, bruises old and new marks that did not belong on a child. His jaw tightened and his hands shook with anger he forced down. Wrapped in blankets, Evan finally stopped shivering. His lips slowly regained color. Better, Jonah asked. Evan nodded, yes, sir. Call me Jonah. Jonah, the boy repeated carefully. Eliza handed him a cup of warm broth. Drink slow. Evan obeyed, watching them both like he expected the moment to break. You're safe here, Jonah said. No one is taking you tonight. Why, the boy asked suddenly. The word came out sharp, suspicious. Jonah hesitated. He could lie, say, because it was right, because it was kindness, but something told him Evan needed truth, because my daughter asked a question that mattered, and because I once lost someone I couldn't save. Evan listened closely. I had a brother, Jonah continued. He was younger than me. He got sick in winter, and we didn't get help in time. I watched him die, and I spent years pretending I didn't care about the world anymore. He looked at the fire. But today I remembered that pretending doesn't change anything. The boy absorbed this silently. Eliza yawned. Hard bedtime, Daddy. Jonah smiled faintly. You can sleep in the loft. Evan, it's warmer up there. I can sleep on the floor. Evan said quickly. No, Jonah replied, you're not trouble. Eliza took Evan's hand. Come on, I'll show you. The two children climbed the ladder together. Their voices murmured softly above. Jonah sat alone by the fire, rifle resting nearby, listening to the wind. Outside, his thoughts churned. Men who hurt children did not let go easily, he knew that. In the night, he heard a sound, hoofbeats distant, slow, his body tense, but the sound faded, perhaps only his imagination. Morning came pale and cold. Jonah woke stiff in the chair. He started breakfast before the children rose. Evan descended the ladder, quietly mourning Jonah. Morning, did you sleep? Yes. Eat. They sat at the table. Evan waited until Eliza arrived before touching his food. That small act cut deeper than any wound. After breakfast, Eliza dragged Evan outside, chattering about chickens and snow. Jonah watched from the doorway. Something like peace settled in his chest briefly. Then he heard it again, hoofbeats closer this time, real. 3 riders appeared at the tree line, their coats dark, their faces hard. Jonah reached for his rifle. Trouble had found them, and it had a name, even if Jonah did not yet know it. Jonah stepped out into the snow, rifle resting easy, but ready in his hands, a cold bit hard. But he barely felt it. His eyes were locked on the 3 riders, moving down the trail, slow and deliberate, like men who knew exactly where they were going. Eliza froze near the barn. Evan stood beside her, his body going rigid like a hunted animal. Inside, Jonah called now. Eliza grabbed Evan's hand and pulled him toward the cabin. The boy hesitated only a second before following. The rider stopped 20 paces out. The man in the center leaned forward, thick neck, heavy shoulders, a smile that did not reach his eyes. Morning, he called. Name is Calder. These are my associates. Jonah did not lower the rifle. What do you want? Looking for a boy, Calder said. About 8, dark hair, skinny, runs off from where he belongs. Jonah's jaw tightened. This is private land. Turn around. Calder chuckled. Easy now. We just want what's ours. He's not yours, Jonah said flat. Calder shrugged. Papers say otherwise. We give strays work, food, purpose. He stole from us and ran. You don't own people, Jonah replied, and you don't step foot past that tree. One of the other men spat in the snow. Big words for one man. I'm not alone, Jonah said evenly. Behind him, the cabin door was shut, barred tight. Calder studied Jonah, calculating the wind, moved through the trees. Snow whispered down. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Calder said. Leave, Jonah answered. The pause stretched then, and dangerous. Finally, Calder tugged his reins. Not over, mountain man. They turned and rode away slowly. Jonah waited until they vanished before lowering the rifle. Inside the cabin, Evan sat on the floor, knees drawn tight, eyes empty again. They'll come back, Evan whispered. Jonah knelt in front of him. Look at me, they want take you. You don't know him, Evan said. He doesn't stop. Jonah placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Then neither do I. The day passed heavy. Jonah kept watch. Mila tried to play, but her laughter rang hollow. Evan barely moved. That night the wind screamed and snow piled high. Jonah sat awake, rifle in hand. Morning brought no riders, but fear lingered. Days followed, thick with tension. Jonah taught Evan small tasks, chopping, kindling, feeding animals. The boy worked hard, too hard, like he was afraid of being sent away. You don't earn staying, Jonah told him one evening. You belong here, because you do. Evan didn't answer, but something shifted. On the 5th day it happened. Eliza screamed. Jonah ran hard, hammering the creek, lay half frozen. Evan stood 2 far-out cracks, racing beneath his feet. "Don't move," Jonah shouted. The ice groaned. Jonah dropped flat, sliding forward inch by inch. Every breath felt like a gamble. "Do exactly what I say," Jonah commanded. Evan nodded, tears streaming. Jonah pushed a branch forward, grab on. Evan did. Together, they slid back. The ice screamed and gave way just behind them, but they reached solid ground. Jonah hauled Evan into his arms, running. Inside the cabin, Evan shook violently, hypothermia, setting in. Jonah, stripped, wet clothes wrapped him tight, held him close. "I'm sorry," Evan sobbed in trouble. Jonah held him harder. "No, you're not, you're alive." Hours later, Evan slept. Eliza clung to Jonah. "I thought we'd lose him," she whispered. "So did I." That night, Jonah understood something deep. This was no longer temporary. When Evan woke later, he asked quietly, "Why didn't you give me back?" Jonah answered without hesitation, "Because leaving someone to suffer is a choice, and it's the wrong one." Evan stared, then nodded like he was storing the truth somewhere safe. Outside, snow fell steady, burying tracks. Inside, something stronger than fear began to grow. Spring came slow and uncertain. The snow did not leave all at once. It melted in patches, revealing dark earth beneath, like the world testing whether it was safe to begin again. Evan grew stronger with each passing week. His cheeks filled out, his hands no longer shook. When he worked, he still startled at loud sounds, still checked the tree line more than necessary. But there were moments where he laughed without realizing it. Jonah watched those moments carefully, like fragile things. One morning, hoofbeats returned. Not 3 this time, 1. Jonah's body went rigid. He stepped outside, hand near the rifle. The rider wore a badge. "Sheriff Cole Mercer," he said, swinging down from the saddle. His face was weathered, tired. "Not unkind, you must be Jonah Hartley." Jonah nodded. "Mind if I come in? It's a long ride, and the cold still bites." Inside, Evan froze at the sight of the badge. Eliza moved closer to him without thinking. "I've had a complaint," Mercer said, setting his hat down. "A man named Calder claims you're hiding a runaway under his legal care." Jonah's voice stayed calm. "He's lying." Mercer nodded slowly. "I suspected as much, but I need to hear it all." Evan spoke quietly, but clearly. He told everything: the work, the hunger, the beatings, the fear. Mercer listened without interruption. When Evan finished, the room felt heavy. "Son," Mercer said gently, "if what you're saying is true, and I believe it is, then no judge worth a seat would send you back." "But he might," Evan whispered. "Then we make sure he doesn't." Mercer looked at Jonah. "File for custody. Come spring, bring the boy to town. I will testify." Relief hit Jonah like a wave. "Calder won't like that," Mercer added. Jonah met his eyes. "Neither do I." The weeks leading to spring were filled with preparation. Evan wrote his story down slowly, carefully. Some nights he cried, some nights he kept going. Eliza sat beside him always. When the trail finally cleared, they rode down together. The courtroom was small, packed, and tense. Calder sat stiff, anger barely contained. Evan spoke again, stronger this time. His voice did not break. Jonah spoke too, about choice, about standing when it is easier to turn away. The judge listened. When the decision came, it was swift. Custody granted. Calder was removed. Evan clung to Jonah, crying, laughing, unable to breathe. That night back in the mountains, the fire burned warm. "You're staying," Jonah said, "forever, if you want." Evan nodded. Forever. Outside, the snow finally melted. Inside, a family had formed, not by blood, but by courage. The ride back to mountains felt different. The same trail, the same trees, the same sky. Yet everything had changed. Evan sat taller in the saddle, no longer holding on like he might be taken away at any moment. Eliza talked the whole way, planting gardens and chickens and lessons, and Evan listened, smiling more than he ever had before. When the cabin came into view, Evan whispered home. Jonah heard it, and his throat tightened. Life settled into a new rhythm. The days filled with work and learning and laughter. Evan learned to land fast, how to read weather, how to set traps, how to mend harness. Eliza taught him letters and stories, and Jonah taught them both how to survive and how to stand. But shadows do not vanish all at once. Some nights, Evan woke from dreams, shaking. Jonah would sit with him by the fire, saying nothing, just being there until the fear passed. "You don't have to be strong here," Jonah reminded him. Spring turned to summer. The valley bloomed green, replaced. White birds returned. One afternoon, a rider appeared again, this time with news. Calder had been arrested, the camp shut down, children freed. Evan listened quietly, then cried, not for himself, but for the ones left behind. They're safe now, Jonah said. That summer, Evan grew in ways Jonah did not expect. He laughed easily. He argued with Eliza. He got angry and sad, and hopeful, all the things children should be allowed to be. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Eliza asked the question, "Is Evan really my brother?" Jonah looked at them both. "If you want him to be." Eliza grinned and yes. Evan blinked, tears forming. "You want me?" Eliza nodded like it was obvious. That night, they carved a third name into the wooden beam above the hearth. Family. Time passed, seasons turned. Evan grew taller, stronger, confident. Jonah aged softer but steadier. Years later, on a quiet evening, Evan split with outside. Eliza cooked inside. Jonah watched them both and thought of the boy at the broken wagon, barefoot in the snow. Can we buy that boy, Daddy? The answer had changed everything. And Jonah knew without doubt that saying yes had saved them all. Years moved like the river below the ridge, steady, patient, unstoppable. Evan grew into the land the way trees do, slow and sure. His shoulders broadened, his hands grew strong. His eyes no longer searched the horizon for danger, but for weather and work and promise. Eliza grew, too. Her laughter stayed bright, but her questions deepened. She read books by firelight and spoke of places beyond the mountains. Evan listened to her dreams like they were maps to another world. Jonah watched them both with quiet wonder. He had once believed life was something that happened and then ended. Now he knew it was something you chose every day. One autumn evening, the wind came soft, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. Evan sat on the porch steps, sharpening a blade. Jonah joined him. "You ever think about leaving?" Jonah asked. Evan considered, "Maybe one day, to see things, learn more, but I always come back." Jonah nodded. "That is all a father can hope for." Evan paused and spoke words that mattered. "I've been thinking about my name." Jonah waited. "I want to keep Evan, but I want your name too." The words settled deep into Jonah's chest. "Then it's yours," Jonah said. That winter the cabin felt smaller, not from cold, but from closeness. Meals were louder, fuller. When storms came, they faced them together. When spring returned, Evan left for a season to learn trade and skill. He came back taller, wiser, carrying stories instead of fear. Eliza hugged him like he had never left. Years later, Jonah stood slower, hair gone gray, hands still steady. He watched Evan and Eliza worked side by side and felt peace settle into his bones. One night, by the fire, Evan spoke softly. "You didn't buy me that day, you chose me." Jonah smiled. "You chose us too." Outside, the mountains stood eternal. Inside, a promise kept breath warm and alive. A boy no one wanted. A question asked without fear. A man who said yes. And a family that proved love is not found, it is built.